"You remind me," whispered the old cleaning lady, her trembling voice barely audible over the polished lobby's chatter. The man in the maintenance uniform froze, his hand tightening around the mop handle. For a brief second, the grand chandelier's reflection in the marble floor blurred before his eyes. Those three words, simple, almost broken, hit harder than any insult ever could. Richard Cole, a 45-year-old billionaire hotel owner disguised as a maintenance worker, had not expected this day to shake his world. He'd come undercover to his own luxury hotel, the Cole Grand Metropolitan, to investigate anonymous complaints of discrimination among staff. But what he witnessed that morning went far beyond policy violations. Moments ago, he had seen manager Jason Monroe accuse Grace, the 52-year-old cleaning woman, of stealing a diamond bracelet. "People like you always find a way to take what isn't yours," Jason had spat, his tone venomous, his words bouncing across the lobby's marble walls. Guests had watched in silent fascination as security rummaged through Grace's belongings like she was a criminal. Nothing was found because the bracelet was still in the guest's safe. The humiliation, however, had already been done. Grace stood motionless, her eyes glistening, her dignity intact. And when she looked up at Richard, the maintenance guy, and whispered, "You remind me," something deep inside him cracked. He recognized her, not as an employee, but as a reflection of his own past. Years ago, he had been that poor black kid mopping hotel floors, judged for his skin, ignored for his ideas. He'd built an empire from the ground up. College, hustling, investments. But in the process, he'd forgotten where he came from. Grace's eyes pulled him back there. That night, back in his rented one-bedroom apartment, Richard made a decision. He called his old college friend, now a renowned civil rights lawyer. "Michael, it's me. I've seen something rotten inside my own walls. I need your help over the next few days." Richard stayed undercover. He watched Monroe closely, and the more he saw, the clearer it became that this wasn't an isolated incident. Monroe had built a quiet system of oppression: unfair shifts, biased reviews, whispered insults disguised as jokes. Grace was just the latest victim, but she wasn't weak. Every insult she endured seemed to make her stand taller. On the fourth day, Monroe announced a new efficiency policy that was clearly a trap. He assigned Grace an impossible workload: 30 presidential suites to clean in a single shift. It was meant to break her spirit. Richard watched her sign the form, her hand trembling but her chin lifted. That night, Richard wired miniature recorders across the hotel. He gathered emails, recordings, testimonies, everything. The evidence painted a brutal picture of racial bias, systemic harassment, and deliberate sabotage. Then came Friday. During a lavish investors' party, Monroe, drunk on arrogance and champagne, began bragging about keeping people in their place. His words were venomous, casual, deadly. "You give them comfort," he said, "and they start thinking they deserve respect. It's just genetics, you know?" Richard's blood turned to ice. The man had just destroyed himself. By Monday morning, the stage was set. Monroe called for a cleaning demonstration, planning to embarrass Grace once and for all, live on the hotel's internal broadcast. The lobby filled with guests, employees, and cameras. "Before we begin," Monroe announced proudly, "our owner, Mr. Richard Cole, has joined us today." The crowd turned. The maintenance worker everyone had ignored for weeks now stood in a perfectly tailored suit, the weight of power in every step. Monroe's face drained of color. "Sir, this isn't—" "Perfect timing, Jason," Richard interrupted smoothly. "You said this would be a demonstration. Let's make it one to remember." At his signal, the grand doors opened. In walked Michael Torres, carrying a heavy briefcase, followed by two officials. Monroe stumbled backward. "Inside this briefcase," Michael announced, "are documents proving systematic discrimination, workplace harassment, and moral abuse, all under your management." Richard pulled out a small device from his pocket. "And here," he said, pressing play, "are your words from Friday night." Monroe's own voice filled the marble hall. "Some people just don't have the brains for higher positions." "It's genetics." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then came whispers, gasps, phones raised. Monroe tried to speak, but the security guards were already walking toward him. "Jason Monroe," Richard said coldly, "you're fired, effective immediately. You'll answer for this in court. Grace Johnson will file the official case with the full support of this company." Grace stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." "For seeing me?" "No," Richard replied softly. "Thank you for reminding me who I was." 6 months later, Grace stood in the same lobby, this time not as a cleaner, but as the newly appointed Director of Human Values and Inclusion. Behind her, a banner read, "The Second Chance Initiative, Building Equality, One Opportunity at a Time." "I once believed my voice didn't matter," Grace said into the microphone, her words steady and proud. "But sometimes justice just needs one person willing to see through the dirt and find the truth beneath it." In the front row, Richard smiled. The company had transformed. Employee satisfaction was at a record high, and their new inclusion program had become a national model. Grace's story had turned from humiliation to hope. As for Jason Monroe, he now worked at a roadside motel, stripped of title, wealth, and reputation. His downfall became a viral lesson. Power built on prejudice eventually collapses under its own weight. One evening, as the sun dipped over the Charleston skyline, Grace and Richard stood on the balcony of the Grand Metropolitan. "You know," Grace said, "the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt us. It's living in a world where their kind of hate doesn't stand a chance." Richard nodded, watching the city lights flicker. "And you helped build that world, Grace." Sometimes the greatest power isn't in punishment, but in redemption. And all it takes to start that change are 3 simple words. "You remind me."